The Jewish State by Theodor Herzl. Chapter 2. The Jewish Question. No one can deny the gravity of the situation of the Jews. Wherever they live in perceptible numbers, they are more or less persecuted. Their equality before the law, granted by statute, has become practically a dead letter. They are debarred from filling even moderately high positions, either in the army or in any public or private capacity. And attempts are made to thrust them out of business also. Don't buy from Jews. Attacks in parliaments, in assemblies, in the press, in the pulpit, in the streets, on journeys, for example their exclusion from certain hotels, even in places of recreation, become daily more numerous. The forms of persecutions varying according to the countries and social circles in which they occur. In Russia, imposts are levied on Jewish villages. In Romania, a few persons are put to death. In Germany, they get a good beating. Occasionally, in Austria, anti-Semites exercise terrorism over all public life. In Algeria, there are travelling agitators. In Paris, the Jews are shut out of the so-called best social circles and excluded from clubs. Shades of anti-Jewish feelings are innumerable. But this is not to be an attempt to make out a doleful category of Jewish hardships. I do not intend to arouse sympathetic emotions on our behalf. That would be foolish, futile, and undignified proceedings. I shall content myself with putting the following question to the Jews. Is it not true that in countries where we live in perceptible numbers, the position of Jewish lawyers, doctors, technicians, teachers, and employees of all descriptions becomes daily more intolerable? Is it not true that the Jewish middle classes are seriously threatened? Is it not true that the passions of the mob are incited against our wealthy people? Is it not true that our poor endure greater suffering than other proletariat? I think that this external pressure makes itself felt everywhere. In our economical upper classes, it causes discomfort. In our middle classes, continual and grave anxieties. In our lower classes, absolute despair. Everything tends, in fact, to one and the same conclusion, which is clearly enunciated in that classic Berlin phrase, Juden raus, out with the Jews. I shall now put the question in the briefest possible form. Are we to get out now, and where to? Or may we yet remain? And how long? Let us first settle the point of staying where we are. Can we hope for better days? Can we possess our souls in patience? Can we wait in pious resignation till the princes and peoples of this earth are more mercifully disposed towards us? I say that we cannot hope for a change in the current of feeling. And why not? Even if we were near to the hearts of princes, as their other subjects, they could not protect us. They would only feel popular hatred by showing us too much favour. By too much, I really mean less than is claimed as right by every ordinary citizen, or by every race. The nation in whose midst Jews live are all either covertly or openly anti-Semitic. The common people have not, and indeed cannot have, any historic comprehension. They do not know that the sins of the Middle Ages are now being visited on the nations of Europe. We are what the ghetto made us. We have attained preeminence in finance, because medieval conditions drove us to it. The same process is now being repeated. We are again being forced into finance. Now it is the stock exchange, by being kept out of other branches of economic activity. Being on the stock exchange, we are consequently exposed afresh to contempt. At the same time, we continue to produce an abundance of mediocre intellects who find no outlet, and this endangers our social position as much as does our increasing wealth. Educated Jews without means are now rapidly becoming socialists. Hence we are certain to suffer very severely in the struggle between classes, because we stand in the most exposed position in the camp of both socialists and capitalists. Previous attempts at a solution. The artificial means heretofore employed to overcome the troubles of the Jews have been either too petty, such as attempts at colonisation, or attempts to convert the Jews into peasants in their present homes. What is achieved by transporting a few thousand Jews to another country? Either they come to grief at once, or prosper, and then their prosperity creates anti-Semitism. We have already discussed these attempts to divert poor Jews to fresh districts. This diversion is clearly inadequate and futile, if it does not actually defeat its own ends, for it merely protracts and postpones a solution, and perhaps even aggravates difficulties. Whoever would attempt to convert the Jew into a husbandman would be making an extraordinary mistake, for a peasant is in a historical category, as proved by his costume, which in some countries he has worn for centuries, and by his tools, which are identical with those used by his earliest forefathers. His plough is unchanged, he carries the seed in his apron, mows with the historical scythe, and threshes with the time-honoured flail. But we know that all this can be done by machinery. The agrarian question is only a question of machinery. America must conquer Europe, in the same way as large landed possessions absorb small ones. The peasant is consequently a type which is in course of extinction. Whenever he is artificially preserved, it is done on account of the political interests which he is intended to serve. It is absurd, and indeed impossible, to make modern peasants out of an old pattern. No one is wealthy or powerful enough to make civilization take a single retrograde step. The mere preservation of obsolete institutions is a task severe enough to require the enforcement of all the despotic measures of an autocratically governed state. Are we, therefore, to credit Jews who are intelligent with the desire to become peasants of the old type? One might just as well say to them, "Here is a crossbow, now go to war." What? With a crossbow while the others have rifles and long-range guns? Under these circumstances, the Jews are perfectly justified in refusing to stir when people try to make peasants of them. A crossbow is a beautiful weapon, which inspires me with mournful feelings when I have time to devote to them, but it belongs by rights to a museum. Now there certainly are districts to which desperate Jews go out, or at any rate are willing to go out and till the soil, and a little observation shows that these districts, such as the enclave of Hesse in Germany and some provinces in Russia, these very districts are the principal seats of anti-Semitism. For the world's reformers, who send the Jews to the plough, forget a very important person, who has a great deal to say on the matter. This person is the agriculturalist, and the agriculturalist is also perfectly justified. For the tax on land, the risk attached to crops, the pressure of large proprietors who cheapen labour, and American competition in particular, combine to make his life hard enough. Besides, the duties on corn cannot go on increasing indefinitely, nor can the manufacturer be allowed to starve. His political influence is, in fact, in the ascent, and he must therefore be treated with additional consideration. All these difficulties are well known. Therefore I refer to them only cursorily. I merely wanted to indicate clearly how futile had been past attempts, most of them well-intentioned, to solve the Jewish question. Neither a diversion of that stream, nor an artificial depressant on the intellectual level of our proletariat will overcome the difficulty. The supposed infallible expedient of assimilation has already been dealt with. We cannot get the better of anti-Semitism by any of these methods. It cannot die out so long as its causes are not removed. Are they removable? Causes of anti-Semitism. We shall not again touch on those causes which are a result of temperament, prejudice and narrow views, but shall here restrict ourselves to political and economical causes alone. Modern anti-Semitism is not to be confounded with the religious persecution of the Jews of former times. It does occasionally take a religious bias in some countries, but the main current of the aggressive movement has now changed. In the principal countries where anti-Semitism prevails, it does so as a result of the emancipation of the Jews. When civilized nations awoke to the inhumanity of discriminatory legislation and enfranchised us, our enfranchisement came too late. It was no longer possible to remove our disabilities in our old homes, for we had, curiously enough, developed while in the ghetto into a bourgeois people, and we stepped out of it only to enter into fierce competition with the middle classes. Hence, our emancipation set us suddenly within this middle class circle, where we have a double pressure to sustain from within and from without. The Christian bourgeoisie would not be unwilling to cast us as a sacrifice to socialism, though that would not greatly improve matters. At the same time, the equal rights of Jews before the law cannot be withdrawn where they have once been conceded, not only because their withdrawal would be opposed to the spirit of our age, but also because it would immediately drive all Jews, rich and poor alike, into the ranks of subversive parties. Nothing effectual can really be done to our injury. In olden days, our jewels were seized. How is our movable property to be got hold of now? It consists of printed papers, which are locked up somewhere or other in the world, perhaps in the coffers of Christians. It is, of course, possible to get at shares and debentures in railways, banks and industrial undertakings of all descriptions by taxation. And where the progressive income tax is in force, all our movable property can eventually be laid hold of. But all these efforts cannot be directed against Jews alone, and wherever they might nevertheless be made, severe economic crisis would be their immediate consequence, which would be no means confined to the Jews, who would be the first affected. The very impossibility of getting at the Jews nourishes and embitters hatred of them. Anti-Semitism increases day by day, and hour by hour among the nations. Indeed, it is bound to increase, because the causes of its growth continue to exist and cannot be removed. Its remote cause is our loss of the power of assimilation during the Middle Ages. Its immediate cause is our excessive production of mediocre intellects, who cannot find an outlet downward or upward, that is to say, no wholesome outlet in either direction. When we sink, we become a revolutionary proletariat, the subordinate officers of all revolutionary parties, and at the same time, when we rise, there rises also our terrible power of the purse. Effects of anti-Semitism. The oppression we endure does not improve us, for we are not a whit better than ordinary people. It is true that we do not love our enemies, but he alone who can conquer himself dare reproach us with this fault. Oppression naturally creates hostility against oppressors, and our hostility aggravates the pressure. It is impossible to escape from this eternal circle. No, some soft-hearted visionaries would say, no, it is possible by the means of ultimate perfection of humanity. Is it necessary to point out the sentimental folly of this view? He who would found his hope on improved conditions, on the ultimate perfection of humanity, would indeed be relying upon a utopia. I referred previously to our assimilation. I do not for a moment wish to imply that I desire such an end. Our national character is too historically famous, and in spite of every degradation, too fine to make its annihilation desirable. We might perhaps be able to merge ourselves entirely into surrounding races, if these were to leave us in peace for the period of 2 generations. But they will not leave us in peace. For a little period they manage to tolerate us, and then their hostility breaks out again and again. The world is provoked somehow by our prosperity, because it has for many centuries been accustomed to consider us the most contemptible among the poverty-stricken. In its ignorance and narrowness of heart, it fails to observe that the prosperity weakens our Judaism and extinguishes our peculiarities. It is only pressure that forces us back to the parent stream. It is only hatred encompassing us that makes us strangers once more. Thus, whether we like it or not, we are now, and shall henceforth remain, a historic group with unmistakable characteristics common to us all. We are one people. Our enemies have made us one without our consent, as repeatedly happens in history. Distress binds us together, and thus, united, we suddenly discover our strength. Yes, we are strong enough to form a state, and indeed a model state. We possess all human and material resources necessary for the purpose. This is therefore the appropriate place to give an account of what has been somewhat roughly termed our human material. But it would not be appreciated till the broad lines of the plan, on which everything depends, has first been marked out. The plan. The whole plan is, in its essence, perfectly simple, as it must necessarily be if it is to come within the comprehension of all. Let the sovereignty be granted us over a portion of the globe large enough to satisfy the rightful requirements of the nation. The rest we shall manage for ourselves. The creation of a new state is neither ridiculous nor impossible. We have in our day witnessed the process in connection with nations which were not largely members of the middle class, but poorer, less educated, and consequently weaker than ourselves. The governments of all countries, scourged by anti-Semitism, will be keenly interested in assisting us to obtain the sovereignty we want. The plan, simple in design but complicated in execution, will be carried out by two agencies, the Society of Jews and the Jewish Company. The Society of Jews will do the preparatory work in the domains of science and politics, which the Jewish Company will afterwards apply practically. The Jewish Company will be the liquidating agent of the business interests of departing Jews, and will organise commerce and trade in the new country. We must not imagine the departure of Jews to be a sudden one. It will be gradual, continuous, and will cover many decades. The poorest will go first to cultivate the soil. In accordance with the preconceived plan, they will construct roads, bridges, railways and telegraph installations, regulate rivers and build their own dwellings. Their labour will create trade. Trade will create markets, and markets will attract new settlers. For every man will go voluntarily, at his own expense and his own risk. The labour expended on the land will enhance its value, and the Jews will soon perceive that a new and permanent sphere of operation is opening here for that spirit of enterprise which has heretofore met only with hatred and obloquy. If we wish to found a state today, we shall not do it in the way which would have been the only possible one 1,000 years ago. It is foolish to revert to old stages of civilization, as many Zionists would like to do. Supposing, for example, we were obligated to clear a country of wild beasts, we should not set about the task in the fashion of Europeans of the 5th century. We should not take spear and lance and go out singly in pursuit of bears. We would organise a large and active hunting party, drive the animals together, and throw a melanite bomb into their midst. If we wish to conduct building operations, we shall not plant a mass of stakes and piles on the shore of a lake, but we shall build as men build now. Indeed, we shall build in bolder and more stately style than was ever adopted before, for we now possess means which men never yet possessed. The immigrants standing lowest in the economic scale will be slowly followed by those of a higher grade. Those who, at this moment, are living in despair will go first. They will be led by the mediocre intellects which we produce so superabundantly and which are persecuted everywhere. This pamphlet will open a general discussion on the Jewish question, but that does not mean that there will be any voting on it. Such a result would ruin the cause from the outset, and dissidents must remember that allegiance or opposition is entirely voluntary. He who will not come with us should remain behind. Let all who are willing to join us fall in behind our banner and fight for our cause with voice and pen and deed. Those Jews who agree with our idea of a state will attach themselves to society, which will thereby be authorised to confer and treat with governments in the name of our people. The society will thus be acknowledged in its relations with governments as a state-creating power. This acknowledgement will practically create the state. Should the powers declare themselves willing to admit our sovereignty over a neutral piece of land, then the society will enter into negotiations for the possession of this land. Here, two territories come under consideration: Palestine and Argentine. In both countries, important experiments in colonisation have been made, though on the mistaken principle of a gradual infiltration of Jews. An infiltration is bound to end badly. If countries, till the inevitable moment when the native population feels itself threatened and forces the government to stop a further influx of Jews, immigration is consequently futile unless we have the sovereign right to continue with such immigration. the society of Jews will treat with the present masters of the land, putting itself under the protectorate of the European powers. If they prove friendly to the plan, we could offer the present possessors of the land enormous advantages, assume part of the public debt, build new roads for traffic, which our presence in the country would render necessary, and do many other things. The creation of our state would be beneficial to adjacent countries, because the cultivation of a strip of land increases the value of its surrounding districts in innumerable ways. Palestine or Argentine? Shall we choose Palestine or Argentine? We shall take what is given us, and what is selected by Jewish public opinion. The society will determine both these points. Argentine is one of the most fertile countries in the world, extends over a vast area, has a sparse population, and a mild climate. The Argentine Republic would derive considerable profit from the cessation of a portion of its territory to us. The present infiltration of Jews has certainly produced some discontent, and it would be necessary to enlighten the Republic on the intrinsic difference of our new movement. Palestine is our ever-memorable historic home. The very name of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvellous potency. If His Majesty the Sultan were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. We should, as a neutral state, remain in contact with all Europe, which would have to guarantee our existence. The sanctuaries of Christendom will be safeguarded by assigning to them an extraterritorial status, as is well known to the law of nations. We should form a guard of honour about these sanctuaries, answering for the fulfilment of this duty with our existence. This guard of honour would be a great symbol of the solution of the Jewish question after 18 centuries of Jewish suffering. Demand, medium, trade. I said in the last chapter, the Jewish company will organise trade and commerce in the new country. I shall here insert a few remarks on that point. A scheme such as mine is gravely imperilled if it is opposed by practical people. Now, practical people are, as a rule, nothing more than men sunk into the grooves of daily routine, unable to emerge from a narrow circle of antiquated ideas. At the same time, their adverse opinions carries great weight, and can do considerable harm to a new project. At any rate, until this new thing is sufficiently strong to throw the practical people and their mouldy notions to the winds. In the earliest period of European railway construction, some practical people were of the opinion that it was foolish to build certain lines, because there were not even sufficient passengers to fill the mail coaches. They did not realise the truth, which now seems obvious to us, that travellers do not produce railways, but, conversely, railways produce travellers. The latent demand, of course, is taken for granted. The impossibility of comprehending how trade and commerce are to be created in a new country, which is yet to be acquired and cultivated, may be classed with those doubts of practical persons concerning the need of railways. A practical person would express himself somewhat in this fashion. Granted that the present situation of the Jews is in many places unendurable and aggravated day by day. Granted that there exists a desire to emigrate. Granted even the Jews do emigrate to a new country. How will they earn their living there? And what will they earn? What are they to live on when there? The business of many people cannot be artificially organised in a day. To this I should reply, we have not the slightest intention of organising trade artificially, and we should certainly not attempt to do it in a day. But, though the organisation of it may be impossible, the promotion of it is not. And how is commerce to be encouraged? Through the medium of a demand. The demand recognised, the medium created, it will establish itself. If there is a real earnest demand among Jews for an improvement of their status, if the medium to be created, the Jewish company, is sufficiently powerful, then commerce will extend itself freely in the new country.